Hello and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 78. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons, and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. They truly don't. I'm speaking today with Joshua Chairs. Joshua is the founder and director of Paranormal Detectives LLC, based in Pennsylvania in the US. He's a passionate paranormal investigator, a writer, musician, and also a paranormal historian. Joshua shares his wealth of knowledge from understanding paranormal hauntings, explaining investigation equipment, how the team's respectful approach connects them to spirits in every location, and we even get to hear some of Joshua's most memorable paranormal experiences from the team's 23 investigations. So let's get into our interview with Joshua. Thank you for coming here today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you love the paranormal so much?
Sure. My name is Joshua Chairs. I am the director and founder of Phantom Detectives LLC's team. I'm a writer, researcher, paranormal historian. I originally got my start in the supernatural by watching a program called Unsolved Mysteries with the great Robert Stack. That was kind of one of the first paranormal programs. And there was an episode on there called The Haunting of the General Wayne Inn. It's this old English coaching inn in Marion Station, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. It's very well haunted. And in that episode, Mr. Stack talked about how obviously that they would basically have, this coaching inn. It was originally called the Steeper's Tavern. It was founded as the Wayside Inn in 1704. And then it was in 1790, was named after a Revolutionary War hero, Major General Anthony Wayne. Had a lot of paranormal experiences in the episode that piqued my interest. This was on season 1, episode 5, around 1987-88. And in that episode, patrons would be sitting at the bar area of the General Wayne Inn, and they said that when that episode aired on Unsolved Mysteries, the TV went clockwise, counterclockwise. That was one of the alleged claims. There's also was Hessian soldiers that were also haunting this old English coaching inn, and many famous dignitaries actually had done stuff here at the General Wayne Inn. George Washington was there, Marquis de Lafayette, Edgar Allan Poe wrote several stanzas of The Raven there. Obviously there was Hessian soldiers going in and out of the place at the time. So obviously there was also supposedly one of the valets that would be outside of the parking lot. He actually said that the car was completely turned on by itself, and also the headlights are on, and nobody was anywhere near the car at all. The car was completely locked. There was also people seeing this Hessian soldier in the basement, and also there would be an adding machine or a calculator that supposedly would add numbers by itself. That was another strange phenomenon that was going on. So that episode, of course, really piqued my interest. Back in 1984, 85, I remember basically seeing, I was a little baby then, but obviously I remember when I was 4 years old watching Ghostbusters. So obviously I was a Ghostbusters kid with Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, and Ernie Hudson, and Sigourney Weaver, and all of them. So that was kind of one of the, also was one of the first true major things that talked about paranormal activity. And also, In Search of by Leonard Nimoy. I mean, everyone watched that show. Spock from Star Trek kind of really started the first true paranormal show, In Search of, that was talked about UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts. So In Search of was one of the first true shows. And then as we got into the 90s, I remember having a UFO experience as in kindergarten, basically seeing triangular lights in the sky, looking up, and seeing different kind of light patterns. So I always kind of knew that we were not alone talking about UFOs, and I always knew that there was something more than what we knew. And of course, in the 90s, of course, I started reading every book by Dr. Hans Holzer. Hans Holzer, of course, was America's first ghost hunter. He actually was one of the ones with his trans mediums, Ethel Myers and Sybil Leek. He was pretty much America's first ghost hunter. He did some legendary cases. And of course, in 92, 93, I remember hearing about this radio program, this radio host by the name of Art Bell. Kind of flipped the AM dial one night, and I started hearing, this is Dreamland with Art Bell. And I started hearing Linda Moulton Howe talking about crop circles and cattle mutilations on Dreamland, Art's weekend show. The voice absolutely captivated captivated me. And I listened to Art almost every single day, listening to him like interview like Malachi Martin, who's a Jesuit priest, talked about exorcisms, and hearing, John Lear talk about UFOs. He was a contract pilot, CIA contract pilot. And of course, hearing other famous like John Ronner talking about angels. It was just an amazing show. And that really, Whitley Strieber talking about his books, Hunger and Communion, and it's just an amazing show. There's so much stuff that you can learn listening to old Art Bell. He was the first really true paranormal radio show host because he was actually the one that read ghost stories over the air. He used to do a radio program called Ghost to Ghost AM, where he would read listeners' ghost stories that people would fax in. And nobody had ever done that at that time. So obviously around the late 90s, some television shows started popping up. One of my first ones that I loved before even Ghost Hunters was one called Most Haunted with Yvette Fielding and Carl Beatty. I originally started watching that and, seeing them go to these old abandoned castles and Tower of London. And it was a really cool show. And it was kind of one of the first television shows to deal with, paranormal on television. So once that started coming on, I decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get involved in this. So I went back, actually had the opportunity to investigate the General Wayne Inn in 2002 with my late mentor, Michaeline Mayer. She actually wrote this quantitative analysis on the inn. And of course, she was on the Unsolved Mysteries episode where she actually showed where people had reported seeing this Hessian soldier. So I went down to the basement area, and mind you, ghost hunting equipment wasn't as advanced as it was back then. You might have had maybe an EMF meter, maybe a tape recorder. You might have had a digital camera and maybe dowsing rods, but you can make out a coat hanger. So that was basically all that you had back in those days. Obviously ghost hunting equipment wasn't very advanced. So I went down to the basement area and just took a digital camera, like the 3 consecutive photos like they teach you in ghost hunting 101 class. And in one of the photos that I took, you can actually see green and yellow streaks of light in it. And I went to try to debunk it. I tried to look at every possible, I took it to different film experts and they said, hey, there's nothing here. I don't know, basically this doesn't look obviously like any kind of flaw in the film. And so basically I kind of knew there's something definitely that matched the eyewitness count. And it's right in the area where people have seen this Hessian soldier, with the yellow and green garments on, named Wilhelm. Supposedly he was died and buried. He was a part of Colonel Rawls' regiment back in 1776 when Washington was crossing the Delaware. So that episode absolutely that was pretty fascinating going to my first investigation. And then of course, all the ghost hunting shows started popping up on TV. One of my first true ones that I loved was Ghost Hunters. Plumbers from Roto-Rooter, they were pretty much the Atlantic Paranormal Society. They're longtime friends of mine. I've known Jason and Steve and Tango for years, and I've been very good friends with those guys. The plumbers from Roto-Rooter, Grant Wilson and all them, when they started coming on TV, I loved how they took an analytical approach. They never believed the client's claims. What they did was they would do an interview with the client and then let the client set up equipment in those areas where there's activity and then, debunk things. For example, a client's hearing some kind of noise that could be explained by maybe a faulty pipe, like a leaky faucet or something that's maybe causing water to drip, and they're thinking water's dripping on its own, and they think it's a ghost that's turning the faucet on and off. That's kind of something that that they would do, the plumbers from Roto-Rooter. So they would debunk stuff. And then in 2007, Ryan Buell came out with Paranormal State. Actually, I went to college with my best friend Gwen. Went to college with Heather, Taddy, and Katrina Weidman, who are on that show. The one where the students from Penn State University would investigate paranormal activity in different homes on A&E. And of course, I actually have Ryan Buell's old EMF meter. The guy that headed PRS actually have his old tri-field EMF meter. And of course, Ghost Adventures started coming out with Zach Baggins, Aaron Goodwin. That was a really great show. So I loved how these ghost hunting shows were basically going and interviewing people before the investigations and then doing the actual investigations and then showing the reveal, what they captured during the investigation. Sometimes they would get stuff, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they would get EVPs and different kind of images and so forth, SLS, cameras. So I always loved how they collected all the data and using the scientific method, which is create a hypothesis, develop the hypothesis, and then see if you get results from the hypothesis. So around 2014, I was watching an episode called The Haunting of Summerwind. Summerwind is a well-known place that is based in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin. It's in the upper UP of Michigan. It was originally created as West Bay Lake Fishing Lodge in 1914. And then 2 years later, the guy named John Frank, who was a traveling merchant from Akron, Ohio, he went ahead and obviously created this fishing lodge. You could stay there for $4.99 a night. And then he sold it to a future U.S. Secretary of Commerce by the name of Sir Robert Patterson Lamont. And Mr. Lamont bought the place and it was renamed the Lamont Mansion. So he actually employed Chicago architects Talmadge Tamaj and Vernon Watson to renovate Summerwind and basically turn it from a fishing lodge into a mansion. So during that time, basically, some of the servants say, hey, there's ghosts and, there's paranormal activity. And Mr. Lamont said, grow up, there's no such thing as ghosts. So basically, Mr. Lamont, supposedly in 1935, in the 1930s, right around the time of the Depression, he's eating. This was actually a summer home, and there's even rumors that 2 U.S. presidents actually stayed there, Calvin Coolidge and Warren G. Harding, who were good friends of Mr. Lamont's. And Mr. Lamont was actually the Secretary of Commerce under Herbert Hoover. So basically, Mr. Lamont, his wife were eating dessert, and according to the legend of Summerwind, there was this basement door rustling and flew open, revealing this ghost. And supposedly Mr. Lamont fired 2 shots, thus missing the ghost and never returning to this mansion. He died in the 1940s, and then he went ahead and sold the place to a lady named Lillian Kiefer. Miss Kiefer actually was in the haunting episode, season 1, episode 5, The Haunting of Summer. Her name was Miss Murray. They usually changed the name to, obviously, to protect the identity of the people that were involved. So over the next 20 years, people would lease out, she would lease out the property of the people, and then it would come back to her, and people would lease it out. And then it wasn't until the 1960s, so the Hinshaw family moved into Summerwind, where a lot of the experience happened. So they had to have this place when they first got it. And I'm a family friend of the Hinshaws. I know Raymond von Bober Jr., Ginger's brother, and I knew April, Ginger's daughter. And they were both there in the 1970s. So when they had to have the place, they would obviously have the windows fly open on their own. So they had to nail them shut. And then they would have contractors that would, come to the mansion to do some work on this Summerwind mansion. And of course, they would report basically that tools would disappear. They would end up like appliances would break down and, and then would start again. And of course, mind you, Summerwind was one of the first places built in the 1920s that had steam heat and electricity. It was one of the first kind of true houses that actually had that back in those days, which was pretty rare for the early 1900s. In Summerwind, Mr. Hinshaw, he was a contract worker. So basically it was like the Brady Bunch family. He had 3 kids, and then Ginger, she had 3 kids. So pretty much when they got together, they also went ahead. Mr. Hinshaw went out to work because he worked as a contractor, and supposedly his car caught on fire. There's actually a story from Summerwind. I would love to tell you that. It was just core your hair with all these appliances breaking down. So Hinshaw found this crawl space. So he sent his 10-year-old stepdaughter, April, into the crawl space. And in the book, she was known as Mary. So they had to change the name. So there's a book written about it 10 years later. So in the crawl space, she found this skeleton with black hair. She completely screamed and was terrified. So the family called the police and reported the skeleton. And then the next day, the skeleton wasn't there. And that's when everything started taking a turn for worse at Summerwind. What happened simply was the stepdad simply went mad. His real name was Jim Hill, but they changed it to the book to Arnold Hinshaw. There was this Wurlitzer organ. He played the organ to all hours of the night. And then what happened simply was the family had to stay in one room, because they were so terrified to go anywhere else. After he played the Wurlitzer organ, the family, Ginger tried committing suicide. He was committed to a mental institution. So supposedly he was claiming that the spirits there were trying to get him to play the organ. So Ginger gave the property back to Miss Kiefer because she couldn't afford to keep up on the payments when she was leasing it out to her. So basically, Ginger's father, Wolfgang von Bober, said, hey, I want to go ahead and make a go of this place again. So he went ahead and he was a popcorn vendor from Chicago. So he was Ginger's dad. So he tried to make it go of the place again. And what he did, he ran into similar problems. He would have construction workers. He tried to make it into a bed and breakfast. So he ran in where people would break down, he had tools breaking down. And in the book, A Carver Effect, A Paranormal Experience that he wrote in 1979, you can still find the book on Amazon, but it's like $300 to $500. It's very pricey. But if you want to see most of the haunting episode, you can pretty much look that up on Google. A Haunting Season 1, Episode 5, The Haunting of Summerwind. And you can see mostly all the stuff from the book is in that episode. So, of course, he would measure rooms, and the rooms were known to change shape. And I actually have the original blueprints to Summerwind, and I'll talk about how I acquired those later on in the interview. So, obviously, much like the Hinshaws, he ran into similar problems. And according to, his son, he actually brought the project for his son, Ray Jr., who basically was trying to come out of the Army at that time. So Ray Jr. simply was upstairs. And then he was kind of putting paint down and priming back in the early 70s. And so he started seeing visions of the gunshot. So he ran downstairs and he saw the bullet holes where Mr. Lamont fired the gun. And then they actually left the property, never came back around the 1973. They abandoned it around 75, 76. They went back to Miss Kiefer again. And then Miss Kiefer died around 1985. So what happened was the book A Carver Effect, A Paranormal Experience. That's where the one that kind of documents this. And according to the main theme of the book, there was this English explorer by the name of Jonathan Carver, who was born in Weymouth, Massachusetts. He was actually granted for a one-third of a parcel of land that was going to be given to him. Now, this is just like, so basically the property, after Miss Kiefer died in 85, a couple named Harold and Babs Tracy from La Crosse, Wisconsin, they bought it. They thought they could make it go with the place again. So Mr. Tracy places a wedding anniversary present to Miss Tracy. So they thought, hey, one of the interesting stories was around 1987, they had reported they walk up to the mansion one day and they reported the mansion was inhaling. Now that's coming from the current owners. The mansion was kind of like taking a life on itself. But unfortunately, what happened was Father's Day of 1988. What happened was lightning and fire struck down Summerwin and this place was burnt to the ground. And what's interesting was there was a neighbor that's next door back in the late 80s, early 90s. He had told my friend Craig Naring, Craig, of course, a team called the Fox Valley Ghost Hunters up in the upper UP of Wisconsin, that town was involved in burning the property down because they were tired of people trespassing on the property, trying to get their own paranormal experience. So what happened was the township took it upon itself because while all the trespassing, they took bales of hay, they just leveled the place. So where I come in 2014 is I see this haunting episode. So I go to summerwinmansion.com because I wanted to research more about the mansion. So I see a section that says blueprints for sale. So I email the seller. I find out it turns out to be Raymond Von Bober Jr., who was one of the co-owners of Summerwin back in the 70s, Ginger's brother. I make an offer and I buy the original engineering diagrams to Summerwin, which I still have to this day. So I went ahead and made an offer, bought them, and then I reached out. I saw a newsfeed of Summerwin on YouTube, and I found out my friend Craig Naring, who from the Fox Valley Ghost Hunters, he was friends of Harold and Babs Tracy. He actually knew the owners, and we created the Summerwin Restoration Society to restore, rebuild, and relaunch this place as a haunted bed and breakfast. And I worked with Craig for a couple of years on the project, helping him get radio shows on like Coast to Coast and Dr. J Radio Live and Darkness Radio with Dave Schrader. So obviously I was just trying to help get publicity. And I will say that there is a well-known producer of many ghost hunting shows on television that's been in touch with Craig about trying to potentially do a future, rebuild of this place. He wants to do a television show showing it as it's, investigated after it's rebuilt and after it's not rebuilt. So I think that would be really cool, rebuilding a haunted house. Nobody has ever done something like that I know of. So hopefully there's a lot of interest in the place because it was the U.S. Secretary of Commerce's house. It has historical value. So hopefully someday there's actually I passed on the project to Craig and my friend Michelle. Michelle's actually a descendant of Jonathan Carver. I think a many times great granddaughter. So obviously they run the project now, but I did help put that together. It's you can go to Facebook and type in Summerwin Haunted Mansion, and there's the project, all the phases that Craig is kind of leading that now. He's got a copy of the original blueprints. So I hope someday the place is rebuilt because I think it would be an awesome place. And, to be able to have a museum or do tours and stuff like that there, I think would be a really cool idea. So hopefully someday it gets rebuilt.
That sounds fascinating. You are such a whirlwind of knowledge when it comes to the paranormal. You are wonderful to talk to. I did have a question. You do a lot of paranormal investigation. What is your favorite piece of equipment, and which piece of equipment gives you the most or the best responses?
Sure. So there's a lot of different pieces of equipment, and mind you, where it was 20 years ago. So let's talk about the genesis of Phantom Detectives and how I started it. Yep. So obviously I went ahead and started this in August 2020 because I wasn't happy with how my old team was progressing. We weren't really getting anywhere to where I wanted to go. So I went ahead, created business cards, had a website developed from the ground up. I had built my own social media pages, and I started doing investigations on what I did was I trained with a guy named Brian J. Cano, who was on the show called The Haunted Collector at Selma Mansion in 2020. So I took all that knowledge and did our first investigation on December 9th, 2020. And there was this place called the Sanderson Museum. And the Sanderson Museum was founded in 1967 by Andrew Wyeth. He was a friend of Christian Sanderson. And Christian Sanderson, of course, well-known dignitary. He supposedly was a musician, a poet, a radio show host. He used to host square dances inside, outside. So basically there, we actually set up the violin case, and then we started picking up, we called it orb at the same time the security camera was going off, at the same time our battery drain mirrors were going off. So you can add layers upon layers like that. That's pretty amazing. So far, out of 23 investigations that we've done, I would say my favorite piece of equipment. Like there's so many, but for me, the old standard voice recorder, like just doing EVPs, just a standard digital voice recorder always gets great things because sometimes you can pick up words and responses on the digital voice recorder. And of course, the thermal imaging camera, which picks up hot and cold signatures. It's kind of like auto mechanics use them, and they use it to locate missing people in the wilderness when they're doing flying over with helicopters. So that's always a very fascinating thing. So I would say thermal imaging cameras, voice recorders, and of course EMF meters are always like their old-fashioned milligauss EMF meters. Also, I love the SLS camera, which draws the stick figure, like a little person basically against the wall. I love that piece of tech. I actually got the original digital dowsing one made by Bill Chappell that was on Ghost Adventures. There's only about 20 of them in existence. And of course, I've upgraded to a new one since then. But I love the SLS camera. The key is you got to make sure that when you map with the SLS camera, you got to hold it stationary. And then, of course, you got to make sure you put it against solid walls. Make sure there's no chandeliers or no picture frames, because that can easily cause a false mapping. And then, of course, I also love the dowsing rods. Those are great. We actually use the lighted dowsing rods on investigations because they're great because you can change the colors in the dark and they work really nice. So those are just some of the equipment that I love. And of course, the Ghost Box too, the PSB7, PSB11, scan the AM and FM dial. And we do our Spirit Box session with our psychic medium, Melissa Ferrazzano, who basically is a student of Cindy Kaza from the Holzer files. We created our own version of the Estes method, which I feel is hands down better than everything on most of the shows on television today. So that's awesome. I think it just depends on what you're looking for. But for me, most of the EMF meters and the SLS cameras and the thermal imaging cameras are my favorite.
Yeah, nice. Oh, you're right up my alley when it comes to paranormal investigation. I've done a little bit in the past, but you have so much knowledge. I did want to ask you one question. Have you ever had spirits follow you home from your investigations? Have you had incidences happening in the home that you couldn't explain, that you might have put back to, you've just been out and you've done an investigation, you've come home?
Not yet, but I will say, because I think it's because the way that we approach the investigations, we try to be kind and deaf as they were in life. So when you say please and you say thank you, and you try to show respect, thank you for allowing us to come in your home or your business, and thank you for allowing us to conduct this investigation. So when you treat them with respect, I think a lot of them, most of the time, will be happy to talk to you, or most of them will basically maybe touch you or set off a piece of equipment for you to let you know that they're there. So when you're kind to them and you're not don't do the Zach Baggins way. I've seen Zach go, if you do it to him now, do it to me. That to me is the wrong approach. That's how, if you noticed, he always got stuff following him home, because obviously that's the way. I think that's more for the ratings and getting television contracts, and for the entertainment value. He's trying to entertain people. So I think a lot of these shows on television, it's kind of like watching WWE. It's parts of it are real, but then there's parts of it that are also scripted for reality television. So obviously it's entertainment at its value. So obviously I believe that when you treat the spirits with kindness and respect, and you show them that, hey, this is your home, your business, we're coming into your place. Thank you for allowing us. And when you show respect, most of the time, and also if you bless yourself too, if you use a holy water from Jerusalem, we have that, and we also burn sage. If you prepare yourself enough, we haven't had any problems yet with anything following us home.
And you know why? I do a lot of work with paranormal, work with the spirits, or work with the dark entities in the home clearings and so forth. You've hit the key word, which is respect. When you respect spirits, and you respect the locations, and you respect any other types of entities that may be present, they generally are quite happy to communicate with us, and they don't follow people home. It's when you get people that may sort of try to ramp up the energy to get responses, a lot of the spirits don't like that. I've seen people that have got scratched. I've been in places where people have got scratched because they've been disrespectful, they've swore at them, they've asked them. It's not a circus act. They're living entities in our environment.
Exactly. And by not showing them respect or treating them with respect, they're gonna let themselves, they might attach themselves to you, they might, scratch you, they might think crazy things before. So it all comes down to how you interact with the environment. So if you show respect to the environment, you'll be perfectly fine. I think it just comes down to, showing that, treat them with kindness. And we get results on every investigation, at least 2 or 3 pieces of evidence. That's what it's all about, is just showing humbleness and respect. And that's all you got to do. That'll change everything.
Yep, and you can also just ask them to go home. I used to work at it's a now abandoned mental health facility here in Tasmania, and I used to work as a paranormal tour guide. And I'd occasionally get some of the kids that were at this site that come for a ride home in my car and play with the radio and the headlights and all sorts of things. And I would just say to them when I got home, I'd say, thank you very much for coming for a ride, but it's now time for you to go home. And away they go. It's all about the approach. Now, you love your paranormal investigation. Do you have any advice for budding paranormal investigators who want to get in, they want to do this, where to start?
Sure. So especially like if you want to be able to get started in paranormal investigation. So obviously there's this new directory I think you could probably get started. It's called paranormalsocieties.org. So what paranormalsocieties.org, there's also paranormalsocieties.com. What you probably want to do is go on the .com. Unfortunately, was created by Bill Wilkins in 2007, but unfortunately was left abandoned. He left the website abandoned in June 2020. But there's over 4,892 teams on that website. And of course, my friend Josh Vandy Wettering created paranormalsocieties.org as a follow-up. It doesn't have as many teams as the .com does, but go on that online directory and look for your state, like in the old .com, because the .com has more teams that are probably still active today. So you just want to go look up like a database, look for like paranormal societies in your state or wherever you're at around the world. Try to find a local team and then see if that team's got a website. And then what you could do is after you're involved, see if they do like public investigations. Those are a great way to get your foot in the door and maybe even get like a membership into their society if they let you, once they get to know you and work with you and see what gifts that you might be able to offer their team. So a great way to do that, of course, is, the Paracons, of course, are all over the darn place. I mean, you can go to there's Paracons all over the place, from Pennhurst to Spring City to, Texas Paracon. So the Paracons are a great way because you can meet like all the famous paranormal celebrities from like Grant Wilson to Jason Hawes to Amy Bruni, Adam Berry, Cindy Kozler from the Holzer Files, Dave Schrader. I mean, the Paracons are a great way to like meet like-minded people that are interested in paranormal investigation. So you can go to the Paracons, you can go to your local ghost tours and see if there's like ghosts, like this Google search like ghost tour Savannah, Georgia, ghost tour Houston, Texas. So you can see if there's like paranormal tours in those areas, and then just like go ahead and book the tour, and then see maybe you can either work as a job and eventually as a tour guide part-time, or you can get involved like doing a public investigation with one of these local teams. I mean, it's not hard. You just have to basically Google search it and then just type it up and find it. I mean, I've known like, probably over 1,000, 2,000 teams myself. So obviously it comes down to, you have to find the teams basically. Once you find the teams, you're going to be in great shape. I highly recommend networking is the way to do it. So probably your start is your public investigations and your Paracons.
Perfect. And what would be the basic equipment? Because I know from my limited experience that I've had with paranormal investigations that there are thousands of different types of devices. What would be maybe your top 3 or 4 suggestions for people who are getting into paranormal investigation? If they don't want to spend in the thousands of dollars that you can spend, where could they start?
Sure. So if they want to go ahead and start just like I did, and I think the best way is there's a website, actually a couple of websites I can share where you can buy paranormal equipment kits. There's a website called ghoststop.com. They sell paranormal equipment, and what's really cool is they just bought Digital Dowsing, which was equipment line, a product line from Bill Chappell, like, the Obulus and the Paranormal Puck 2. Ghoststop.com, I think, has a really cool kit for like $100 $150 that includes like a ghost box. It includes a meter. It also includes like a couple EMF meters and a voice recorder, and also like just a couple like, flashlights and stuff like that. So you can buy one of these little kits basically for, I would say, $100 $150 that you can on ghoststop.com. And there's also the ghosthunterstore.com. My friend Dave Giuliano runs, based out of Philadelphia, theghosthunterstore.com. He has little kits. Those 2 websites is where you can start. And, also if you find, like, just type in paranormal equipment, like on Google, you can probably find other places where you can buy like an EMF meter, a voice recorder. Heck, you could even like take dowsing rods. You can just take some coat hangers and just make them out of dowsing rods like that. Or you can just buy a set for like $15 $20 right on Amazon. So they sell a couple pieces of paranormal equipment. So there's paranormal equipment all over the place. So I would highly recommend the main 2 for me. Also, Relatively Paranormal. My friend Todd Sylvia, he runs that, relativelyparanormal.com.
That's perfect. Now, with your equipment, Do you personally, because I know you've got Melissa, she comes with you, she's your psychic medium, she uses her psychic skills when she's tuning into the environment, tuning into the spirits. Do you find that your other team members, as they do more and more investigations, their own psychic skills start to become more developed? Do you talk about that amongst yourselves?
Absolutely. Like, for example, we have investigation teams, three pieces. So it's myself, Melissa, and we also have a guy I want to talk about, Rick Warner. So I like to talk about each member of the team also because Rick Warner comes from the UFO world. I invited him in March 2021. He's a certified MUFON investigator. He has numerous certificates from MUFON University. So he actually started using pendulums and also divinity tools. And he's gotten very good responses from those. And he, also has gotten better and better. And of course, we also have the world-renowned psychic lawyer, psychic explorer, Mark Anthony. He's going to be joining us here in the future. And I can't wait to see how his gifts really help because he actually is an expert. He also travels to mystical locations all over the world. He's been on Coast to Coast AM, Gaia TV. He's world famous. So we also have Holly Foss. Holly, of course, is working with us remotely. She actually worked for the Penn State Paranormal Research Society. She was developed by her mentor, Elfie Music. Elfie, of course, is an expert on occult symbols and spiritual beliefs. And I'll get you in touch with Holly to book a show in the future. But we're the main core team. I've noticed both of them, Rick especially, has developed a lot more over the last 3 years, that kind of psychic medium gifts learning under Melissa. And of course, picking up on his own responses, with the dowsing rods, he's very good correlating, when he holds them, he can feel the energy. And mind you, he's not moving them. He's holding them and they're crossing, pointing in the direction. And they look great because we use a lighter one. So I'm going to say yes, especially with, our team member, Rick, and of course, Mark Anthony, who's picked up on things, done hundreds of investigations as well. So I would say, yes, each team member that we have is picking up on their own kind of, mediumship abilities on these investigations, and they're using ESP, which is like a sixth sense. I think we all have that sixth sense. Whether or not we choose to develop it is up to us and actually apply, those gifts that we have. But we all have it. But it's obviously we got to choose how far we want to develop those gifts. So I would say, yes, I would think our team member Rick has really enhanced his gifts even more with using the dowsing rods and the divinity tool, like the pendulums. So it's really helped him a lot, get a lot of great responses. So Rick has really gotten connected to the spirit world that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Do you have some really memorable paranormal experiences that you'd like to share with the listeners today?
Sure. I have so many from the investigations that we've done. I'd like to talk about one of my most memorable experiences is a place called Pennhurst. It's in Spring City, Pennsylvania, developed in the early 1900s, and it was basically for mentally challenged people. Funny thing is, the night I was there, Grant Wilson from Ghost Hunters was actually there. He gave me a tutorial how to hold the SLS camera, how to map it. But me and my former team member, who's since left Fan Detectives, she was a Civil War reenactor, sound engineer. She was like my founding co-founder kind of Fan Detectives. Invited her in after we were in the basement area of the Philadelphia building, which is on the bottom of these tunnels. And mind you, we saw this pair of cold boots on this rusted out iron door. So we tried to debunk it, look for reflective surfaces. Why was this cold signature of these boots coming on this rusted out iron door? And I tried to figure out maybe someone from the tour basically could have walked on it or maybe put a footprint on it. I didn't see nobody at all that was in that area. Nobody had gone far down that hallway, that night that we were there. So I have no reasonable explanation why that happened. And then later we started hearing bangs as we were in the Mayflower building, and we heard the laughter of children. So that was a pretty memorable experience investigating Pennhurst. I've been there, many times over the last couple of years. And of course, is the Millivant Selma case, our second ever investigation. So what was wild was we actually had this security camera on this door. And mind you, this old mill, it was founded by Samuel Lightfoot, 1747. Famous poet named Sarah Oberheiser once lived there in the 1920s. This door flew open by itself. I mean, mind you, it was bolted shut. You see that on our YouTube channel, Phantom Detectives LLC, under shorts. And this door completely flew open by itself, and I have no reasonable explanation why that happened. And I still try to debunk it, and there was no wind, there was no rain that night. So that was a pretty memorable paranormal experience. Of course, one of my other paranormal experiences I remember is we did something called World's Largest Ghost Hunt. We went back to the Sanderson Museum with Rick and Melissa in 2021. So this was after we did the Betsy Ross house. And of course, Rick and Sasha, our former team member, actually picked up some growls in the basement area of the Betsy Ross house. So we went back to the Sanderson Museum, this time with our two other members. And then what happened was they went downstairs and they said all these equipment bags were piled up. And, we basically, Rick and Melissa were like, hey, did you and your former team member actually, pile these bags up and try to block you guys from leaving? I said, no, we were upstairs in the violin room. So for these bags to pile up by themselves, we all were upstairs in the violin room. I have no reasonable explanation. And the problem is we didn't have a camera in that room, which darn, I kind of hope we would capture that. That always happens. But what was interesting was we did an EVP session called Phantom Time, was what the Phantoms talked to us on our voice recorders. And one of the EVPs that we got was when a woman that said, be afraid, be afraid. And we think the voice that we captured, basically Christian Sanderson's wife, Hannah died in the museum in the 1940s or right around World War II from tuberculosis. So we think it might be her spirit, like that was the one that piled up those bags and didn't want us to leave the museum. So that museum is still very active to this day. So those are just some of the many memorable paranormal experiences that I've had.
Would you like to share with the listeners how they can contact you, some of your social media, how people can see what you're doing and get in contact with you? Do you teach people how to do paranormal investigations?
It's funny you mention that. Yes, we do. And so first thing, let's go ahead and plug in the websites here. So you want to go through the website. So the first one, if you want to reach our team member, Holly, you have questions on occult symbols, spiritual beliefs. She has a research department. Holly's website is all one word, Holly Faust, HOLLY FAUST.com, Holly Faust, FAUST.com. That's Holly's website. If you have a question on a UFO case, you want something like that investigated, you want basically questions on any kind of UFO, UAP research, Rick Warner, his website is ERC2Explorer.com. So E as in Edward, R as in Randall, C, and the number 2, Explorer.com. Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer, you want to read about his books and interview Mark. His website is afterlifefrequency.com. Afterlifefrequency.com. If you want to relate to Melissa, who's our psychic medium case manager, if you have a question on a reading or you want to know about mediumship, her website is all one word, psychicmediumautumn.com. That's psychicmediumautumn.com. And also she's on Facebook as Psychic Medium Autumn Melissa. To reach Dark Matter News. So Dark Matter News, of course, has ties to this man, Art Bell, creator of Coast to Coast AM. He came back for the final time in 2017. And my friend Leo Ashcraft has actually created a radio program called Dark Matter News for Art Bell on Midnight in the Desert. It was a 5-minute NBC-style paranormal newscast that was on the bottom of Art's show. That website is all one word, darkmatternews.com. That was a news service of Art Bell's Dark Matter Digital Network that we purchased in 2021. We own the Dark Matter News name, the websites, the logos, the audio files that Leo recorded for Art. Our team website, which is a central hub, which is all one word, Phantom, PHANTOM, detectives.org, phantomdetectives.org. You can find all those other websites right on phantomdetectives.org.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I had a look at your website and I noticed that you have a page where you actually teach people how to do paranormal investigation.
Yes. So what you can do is on the hyperlink, we have a Patreon page. We have a subscription system where people can learn how to investigate with a professional paranormal investigation team. We're very good at what we do. We teach people how to use the dowsing rods, how to store their equipment, how to do EMS sweeps, how to do SLS camera sweeps, how to record EVPs, all of that. So there's on the website, you can go, there's something that says Paranormal Investigator Training. So you click that link, it'll take you to Patreon. And you can also just go right to patreon.com/phantomdetectives.
And I will, of course, include all these links in the description box for our listeners so that they can find you. I just want to thank you, Joshua. Thank you so much for coming on today. I have learned a lot about paranormal investigation. I've learned a lot about the history, and I just want to thank you for being here.
It's so great. And anytime you want to do this again, just feel free to reach out to me on email or, I'm not hard to find. I'm on, every single social media platform. I run all the Phantom Detectives, websites, and I also run Dark Matter News. So I own Dark Matter News, and I also share it. The team actually owns it, so we keep that going. I keep it more as a tribute to Art Bell and the memory too, because since he passed away in 2018, so I keep it more as a tribute site now to his name and his logo. But Phantom Detectives is going to continue to get better and grow, and hopefully we'll continue to get more great experiences that we can come back and maybe in the future we can bring the team on.
That'd be great. I really look forward to that. Thank you, Joshua, for being here today.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
So in episode 79, we are entering the classroom. I can hear you going, what is she thinking? What is she doing? We are entering the classroom with dark entities as the teachers. And now you think I'm really nuts. No, I am not. And I'm sure you are wondering, what could they possibly have to teach us? You might just be a little bit surprised. We're going to unpack, does attracting dark entities reflect our personal innermost repressed shadow selves? And could this be what draws them to us in the first place? Also, we're going to look at the processes that these fascinating entities teach us and the lessons that we can learn from them that can impact our lives in a really positive way. So stay tuned for that one. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.